Welcome to this classic clash featuring the legendary Alexander Alekhine with the white pieces taking on S. Freymann. We're in for a treat with the Roy Lopez opening. The game kicks off with the most standard moves in chess history. White and black both stake their claim in the center and develop their knights, leading us into the main lines of the Spanish game. White immediately challenges the center with a pawn to d4. After a quick exchange of pawns, the knights come off the board on c6, simplifying the position slightly but keeping the tension high. Both sides now complete their development, connecting the rooks and positioning their pieces for the middle game battle. White puts a pin on the knight, but black calmly challenges it. The position is perfectly balanced, and here, black unleashes a brilliant positional sacrifice with knight to d7. The idea is to give up a pawn to rip open the queenside files for his heavy pieces. A fantastic concept. Alekhine accepts the challenge. His bishop takes the bishop on c6, ready to snatch the pawn and see if black's compensation is real. And that is the whole point. The pawn recaptures on c6, a fantastic move that validates the entire sacrifice. This opens the b-file for black's queen and rook, generating tremendous pressure. White's queen immediately hops to c4 to attack the newly weakened pawn. Black responds by developing the bishop to g5, putting pressure on White's knight, and White tucks the bishop away to g3. But here, Black makes an inaccuracy that lets White off the hook. He had a much stronger way to keep the pressure on. The best try was pawn to h5, and after pawn to f4, the pawn continues to h4, harassing the bishop. Then pawn takes the bishop on g5, and Black's pawn recaptures on g3, maintaining a strong initiative. But in the game, Black pushes the pawn to c5, which releases the central tension and gives White a much easier time. White now methodically improves his position. The rook slides to d1, and after a few more maneuvering moves, Alekhine has completely consolidated and is now building a small but very real advantage. And just as White's edge is growing, Black makes another slip that weakens the king side. There was a much more solid continuation. The better defense was knight to c6. Then, if White's knight jumps to d5, the knight can hop to b4. After queen to c4, Black's knight simply takes the knight on d5, and that wins a piece. Instead of that, Black plays pawn to g6, creating permanent weaknesses around the king and inviting White's knight into a monster outpost. And Alekhine does not need a second invitation. The knight leaps to d5, a dominant square. From there, his queen begins probing the queen side, dancing from a6 to a5, forcing Black to create even more weaknesses. With the queen side under control, Alekhine shifts his focus. The bishop swings to h4, provoking Black's pawn to march to g5. This creates new targets around the king for White's coming attack. The final pieces swing into position for the assault. The knight lands beautifully on f5, the queen repositions to c3, and Black is forced to create yet another weakness with pawn to f6, and here comes the battering ram. White plays pawn to f4, preparing to blow open the f-file and launch the decisive attack on the king. Black is under immense pressure, and now makes a serious defensive error. The coming storm required a more precise defense. The correct move was knight to f7, shoring up the king side. After queen to f3, the king could step to h7, and after queen to g4, the rook slides to e8, and Black is holding on. But back in the game, Black plays the knight to g6, and this move simply fails to defend, allowing a beautiful winning combination. Boom! Alekhine uncorks a stunning sacrifice. Knight takes the pawn on h6 with check, ripping open the king's defenses. There's no choice, the bishop must take the knight on h6. What a follow-up. Pawn pushes to f5, a brilliant move that attacks the queen and prepares to eliminate the key defender on g6. The position is collapsing. The queen has to move, and it drops back to e7. And now, another fantastic shot. The pawn takes the knight on g6, completely shattering Black's pawn cover. And here's the devastating idea. If Black pushes the pawn to g4, White's queen swings to d3. After the king moves to g7, the bishop simply takes the pawn on d6, and that wins a piece. Black tries to bring the bishop back to f8 for some desperate defense. But it's too late. The queen slides to c4 with a check, pulling the king further out into the open. And that is the final mistake. The king steps to g7, walking right into the finishing blow. And there it is. The bishop takes the pawn on d6, attacking the rook and shattering what's left of the position. A game-winning shot, and at this point, Freymann resigned. Alekhine wins a brilliant attacking game. Black is down material in a completely hopeless position, and here's just one sample of how White would finish things off. The queen could move to e8, but then pawn to e5 attacks the f-pawn. If king takes the pawn on g6, the queen checks from d3, and after pawn to f5, the attack is overwhelming.